you so much for being here. My name is Stephen Hook. This is Zach Affelt, and we're the co-presidents of PoliTalks. PoliTalks actually came from an idea that Zach and I had a little over a year ago, actually. We met our first night of freshman year and very quickly realized that we didn't align on everything politically. But over the past 4 years have grown a really strong friendship that's one of the most important parts of our lives politically in growing what we believe in and how we talk to one another and on a wider scale how we look at politics. So PoliTalks has grown over the past year, and we now have over 80 students who have signed on it and said they agree with this idea that we are bigger than our politics, and we can speak to those unlike ourselves. And that's why we've asked Heather Mizeur here to be with us. Throughout her career, she has really shown that this idea is one that can bring great success to people. Listening to those unlike ourselves is so critical to depolarizing our communities and making sure that there are people over our politics and seeing the humanity in one another. So we're so grateful that you all have been here, are here tonight, committing to this idea as well, learning how we can speak to people unlike ourselves and all be better for it. So Heather, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your partnership. We also want to thank the Starr Center for the Study of the American Experience, the Holstein Center of Ethics, and Phi Beta Kappa for helping fund this event. So thank you all.
No interruptions. Good evening, everyone. And Stephen and Zach, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, for all the hard work you're doing on campus to encourage this kind of civic engagement, this honorable civic engagement. To all of the members of PoliTalks, to the Starr Center for the Study of the American Experience, the Holstein Program in Ethics, Phi Beta Kappa, all the students who have joined us here, residents of Kent County and surrounding areas, our Mayor of Chestertown, David Foster, here with us tonight, and lots of people joining us on the live stream. We've got a really robust collection of people here to have this important dialogue tonight. Let me just do a sound check to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? All right, great. It's incredible timing to be on a campus having a dialogue about smoothing out the edges of contentious political debate just 19 days before what is probably the most contentious election of all of our lifetimes. And yet, how perfect it is to set conditions that will prepare us for the hard work ahead after the votes are counted. Because no matter who wins on November 5th, we will remain a deeply divided nation. But it doesn't have to be this way. The greatest power we hold right now is our ability to change how we interact with each other. But first, I'm going to invite you into the eye of the storm. There's a swirling mass of chaos all around us right now. And the time we're going to spend together tonight is not about parsing out specifics of the national election or finding consensus by the end of the night on how a policy should be framed or who somebody should vote for in this election. No, tonight is about standing inside the calm center of this chaos and gaining some tools for how to navigate the harder work ahead of stitching this country back together after we've laid bare our wounds in this election, discovered our fault lines, and unveiled the deep distrust that we're seeing all across the country in people who should be seen as our neighbors, our friends, our fellow members of our country. Nothing about our current state of national affairs feels good. We all talk about wanting it to change, but rarely do we really talk to each other about how to do that. And that's what's going to make our time together tonight, I think, unique and very special. One of the tools that I like to use to get us in the right frame of mind for doing this kind of work is a tool that comes out of the HeartMath Institute, which uses scientific approaches towards getting us into greater coherence in our body, in the rhythms of our heart, so that we are able to connect to a deeper wisdom and to have greater clarity and to bring a more sense of stable calm inside a process like this. And so there are a lot of tricks of the trade at the HeartMath Institute, but one of them is called the quick coherence technique. And the reason why I want to show you this tonight is not only to get on the same page together in that place of coherence, but because it's something that you can use really fast at any point of your day where you're deciding, I need to bring something down a notch. And it may not even be because you're in a challenging dialogue with someone. It may be that you're in the most challenging dialogue can sometimes be in your own mind, your own thoughts running crazy and mad, your own frustrations with things. So a quick coherence technique is an opportunity to come into this greater heart space. And I'm going to walk you through it. It's real easy. It's something simple you can take with you anywhere you go. I'm going to tell you what it is, and then I'll walk you through actually doing it. So we're going to focus our breath in the area of our heart and chest. And we're going to breathe through that space for a little while. And then after we have brought our attention to heart-focused breathing, I'm going to invite you to bring forward a regenerative feeling, such as care, appreciation, or joy for something or someone in your life. And you'll hold on to that. What does that mean, Heather? Well, one example, one of my go-tos, I have a few go-tos on this. I have a dog that loves me to sing a special song I made up for her that has her name in it every morning, talking about what a good morning and what a great day she's going to have. And every time I sing this song to her, she flops over on her back and she rolls around with her paws up in the air, and it is the sweetest, cutest thing I've ever seen. And so when I'm doing the quick coherence technique and I invite the regenerative feeling, something like that, something that just makes your heart want to open up wide, okay? So I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And bring the attention of your breath into your heart or chest area. Breathing a little slower and deeper than normal, but at a rhythm that is comfortable for you. And as you continue your heart-focused breathing, I invite you to connect to a regenerative feeling such as joy, care, or appreciation for someone or something in your life. A very simple technique like that can just bring us right into a deeper place of coherence. And what is interesting about the science at the HeartMath Institute is when a group does this, you kind of drop into a place of syncing and connecting together. So with that, I'm inviting us this evening to have a walk in our humanity. The sole essence of who we are before we were conditioned by thoughts and opinions. The notion of our humanity has interested me ever since I was very young. I've always been a political nerd, a lover of democracy and the promise of liberation that can come from self-governance. And when I first came across the American Creed in, I want to say maybe 8th grade, I memorized it, and I started each morning standing with my hand over my heart in front of an American flag in my bedroom, reciting this American Creed. And it speaks to our humanity, and I'm going to share it with you tonight because I think it's a great basis for our dialogue. I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed. A democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states. A perfect union, one inseparable, established upon the principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to obey its constitution, to respect its laws, and to defend it against all enemies. And I would always add in, God bless America. I told you I was a political nerd. But what really spoke to me as I was first learning that was I'd learned a lot in school about what was freedom, justice, and equality. We didn't talk a whole lot about what is meant by our humanity. And that is the piece that is so central to what is missing in our collective community engagement. The greatest risk we face as a nation right now is our vast polarization. We don't trust each other anymore. We've lost touch with the essence of our humanity, our common struggles, and our shared dreams. Recently, I went on a humanitarian mission to Zimbabwe and became intimately familiar with the ubiquitous African practice of Ubuntu, the belief that I am because you are. Ubuntu is the spirit of human interconnectedness, a universal bond of sharing that connects all humanity. Ubuntu is knowing that we can be human only together. Knowing that we can be human only together. This is the core spirit that animates WeAreOne. Before it became the name of my nonprofit organization, WeAreOne was the campaign slogan that I used in my 2022 campaign for Congress here in the 1st Congressional District. Running an uphill battle in a gerrymandered district with 60% of the people identifying as the opposite political party could be characterized as political suicide mission. However, the lessons I learned and the progress made by showing up with a spirit of unity in the midst of our polarized electorate should never be discounted. And I'm excited to share with you the insights and observations from this work in helping us get more closely aligned to the more perfect union we might still become. It all comes down to the concepts of being more respectful with each other. Now, I don't know about your study habits, but I was always a sucker for a good mnemonic device when I was in college, so we're going to deconstruct this one. Respectful. R. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is mutual exchange. You give and get together. The word reciprocity comes from the Latin reciprocis, which means moving back and forth. There's a fluidity to this that is a contrast to the rigidity that commonly plagues our civic discourse. Life is a dance, so is democracy. Our best ideas come from an openness to listening and learning from the other, of the people, by the people, for the people. It's all a reciprocal exchange. E, engagement. Democracy, like everything, will die if it doesn't have the right conditions. If too many stray from engaging in a contest of ideas and putting themselves into the process, then our entire experiment dedicated to we the people will perish. Democracy isn't just about the decisions that are made inside the Congress or inside the White House or inside the judicial system. Democracy is what happens inside of our conversations. Democracy is what happens when we engage in disagreement, dissent, and exchange of ideas. Democracy is ours. We must own it. We can't give our power or our engagement away. Just because we vote for people to be our representative voice in these elected positions of office doesn't take away our role as citizens to still be engaged in this process, not just in electing our elected officials, holding them accountable, making sure they know how it is we feel about the issues that are impacting us. We must be inspired to put ourselves into both the messy and beautiful task of staying connected to each other. Democracy is a practice of waking up every day and having the courage to talk to your neighbors with curiosity, compassion, and non-judgment, to keep the country and all we love about it connected to the goodness of who we are deep inside the wisdom of our hearts. S, sources. Check your sources of information. What's true anymore? We live in a fast-paced technological society where artificial intelligence, social media algorithms, declining journalistic standards, and politicians telling outright lies to hold on to power have combined to erode our sense of common understanding of basic truths. What is real and who to believe? We live in a world of illusion. Nothing is ever as it seems. Social media is a reflection of our collective consciousness. It especially can play tricks on our sense of what is real. What lens or video angle is capturing the story? Who are we allowing to write the narrative? What assumptions do our conclusions draw? We have a duty as the observer to be curious, ask questions, and seek truth. And with this duty comes the responsibility of conducting our inquiry with honor, honest self-reflection, and integrity. It's important that we bring inquisition to our sources of information. And my favorite guidance system, it won't surprise you, by what I started us out with tonight, is coming into the heart. Because our heart is part of a very wise system. Our body knows how to give us all kinds of clues and information when we stop to slow down, connect with it, and ask into, what's this deeper truth that I know? You know, that there's a reason why we talk about gut feelings. There's a reason why when you're in an uncomfortable situation and you're feeling compelled to say something, but the risk is high and you're scared to, your heart starts pounding 100 miles an hour. That is your guidance system nudging you. Hey, pay attention here. There's some engagement that's being asked of you. There's something that needs to be said. Don't be scared to say it. Our hearts are always ready to be an active participant with us in assessing our sources of information. P is for pause. The current political environment absolutely breeds a lot of anger and resentment right now. And anger is not a bad thing. Anger is the energy of spring. It motivates action. It's how a flower bursts forth as a seed underground to bloom into the light of the sunshine. But anger cannot own us and push us around. It's our choice how we use its promptings. Our power resides in the pause between stimulus and response. Our power resides in the pause between stimulus and response. Take a beat. When somebody says something that makes you mad, you don't have to immediately respond to it. You can let that come in and settle yourself and make a decision on how do I want to respond to this. By observing our feelings and being mindful of our power to choose our actions, we can invite anger to be a wise teacher rather than an uncontrolled and messy response to outrage. E is for equanimity. Equanimity is mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation. We cultivate more equanimity when we bring mindfulness to the power of the pause. In the last election cycle, I can tell you a thing or two about having to exercise equanimity. I had a program that we called Heather in the Hot Seat, where we specifically set up house parties with Republicans who had no intent to support me, figured they probably wouldn't support me, thought it was kind of curious that a Democrat would be willing to come and talk to them. But my dedication to this desire of reaching across the aisle and finding consensus and showing that we can have this kind of civic engagement really was what motivated me to do this. And I definitely had some scenarios where they were like, oh, let's roast her. Awesome, we've got a Democrat here, we're gonna ask her everything that we're shouting at the TV, you know, like, we hate Nancy Pelosi, and aren't you just like her, and all the, oh my goodness, wow. There were some of those moments where I really had to be in practice with my equanimity to keep my mental composure and my evenness of temper. Because I've always known, or I've learned, I haven't always known this, I've learned over the course of my time honing these kinds of skills, that when someone's really super aggressive towards you, it's really a reflection about their own situation, their own fears, their own discomfort, their own frustration. It's not about you, so I don't need to take it personally. If you read any book that I could suggest for you to read, it would be The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. There are 4 agreements in this book that are really easy to live by. One is to always be impeccable with your word. One is to not make assumptions. Another is to always do your best. And the fourth, I'm sorry.
Don't take things personally.
Don't take things personally. So the fourth, don't take things personally, was the one that I was most often engaging with in these Heather in the hot seats. And when we don't take things personally, we're able to step into that pause, allow there to be an exchange of, all right, you've got that off your chest, great, I'm glad you're saying that, now let me share with you some of what I think. There were also Heather in the hot seats that were incredibly beautiful, that weren't aggressive, that weren't in your face. They were truly cherishing an opportunity to have dialogue with someone who they never expected would come speak to them about a whole range of issues that we probably aren't going to entirely agree on, but find more connection than they anticipated. Which gets us to C. And on C, I just really could not limit it to one word. Because I have found, among many good C words, curiosity, courage, compassion, and connection are really, really key to all the rest of these points. So let's start with curiosity. Don't you want to know and understand more about why somebody else believes the way they do? I mean, come on, some of this stuff is so outrageous. Rather than fight about it, get curious. How do you think that? And not in a judgmental way. I kind of said that in a way that might have been picked up like that. Oh, tell me more. I'm really curious. How did you come to believe that? What experience do you have in life that brought you to be in alignment with that? You know, the extent to which we carry around suffering in life, I think, can often be a stubborn attachment to fixed views. And when we're liberated enough to return to the state of the childlike beginner's mind, where we greet every situation with possibility and curiosity for fresh perspectives, and a willingness to reevaluate a situation based on new information, that's where the real beauty of an opportunity for engagement resides. In this practice, we hold less tightly to certainties, opinions, and concepts that sometimes those rigid opinions that we have can be the very thing that prevents us from sharing, growing, and learning. And I love the mystery of the unknown. There's liberation in it, and an invitation to ask questions and be playful. Now, this doesn't mean stepping away from our values or even changing our positions, but rather making space for a better understanding of another person's perspective. In the process, we might find ourselves more connected to each other's humanity. Courage and compassion. Lions represent the courage of spirit and noble action. Lambs are the guardians of inner wisdom. At any moment, we have within us, at the ready, an energy of a lion and the calm presence of a lamb. When brought together, these two forces can help create a compassionate heart and a wise soul. Our nation needs more of us to summon our courage and compassion in equal measure. Our courage and our compassion in equal measure. Because solutions to our toughest challenges are found within courageous conversations and with great compassion. Now, I'm from rural Illinois originally, and so Abraham Lincoln is one of my all-time political heroes. And one of the things that we must just really be good at or inclined to in Central Illinois is, in Abe's famous words, well, that reminds me of a story. So I want to tell you a few stories as I move through courage and compassion and listening and some of these other topics that we're going to bring up tonight. I want to talk about meeting Ralph. Ralph is from Dorchester County's Natticoke. He's the guy that showed up to a meet and greet wearing a Trump 2024 hat. This was in 2022, when that seemed really unrealistic. During the Q&A, he asked me about being gay and made it clear he wasn't comfortable with, in his words, lifestyles being pushed onto people. I could feel a gasp in the room. People were like, oh my gosh, I thought we moved beyond this. Oh, and we're really uncomfortable. And yet I held Ralph with the greatest compassion I could muster, which really was no different than the compassion I held for myself at one other point in my life. And I pointed out that all opinions in the room were completely welcome, and even Ralph's, because I, as a gay woman, had to deal with my own internalized homophobia at one point in my life. And if I had to struggle with coming to terms in a society that most of our lives, our ages, made it seem like it wasn't okay to be gay. If it took me as a gay woman a long time to come to my own comfort with who I was in the world and how to stand in my truth, who am I to judge somebody else on their journey of finding that comfort? It'd be real easy to just take on that sense of frustration everyone else was feeling in the room. And I got where that discomfort was. It was protective. People liked me, they support me, they're allies to the LGBTQ community. Turns out Ralph is too. In some ways this was a little bit of a misunderstanding in dialogue. But he was able in that moment to receive a great amount of love and compassion from me. And others in the room were too, which completely shifted the feeling of our collective engagement. Not only did Ralph vote for me, he was super excited to send me a picture of his Republicans for Mizeur sign right next to his Trump sign in his yard. And, you know, we stayed in touch over, since the campaign. And our conversations and friendship has meant a lot to me. I spoke to him on the phone recently, and one of the first things that he said to me, and we hadn't talked in a while, was, hey, great to hear from you. Will you please tell me how you're doing with your ankle? It had been 6 months or more since we had talked, and he'd remembered that I'd broken my ankle and wanted to know how I was doing. And then as soon as I got done telling him about that, the very next thing he wanted to say was, I saw that you went to Africa. Tell me about your trip. And I shared with him some of my thoughts about Ubuntu and how that resonated so deeply with what I was doing in the campaign, with what I'm doing with WeAreOne Alliance. And then he starts in an email exchange with me, picking up his own thoughts and discussions about what that sense of Ubuntu means to him. And I want to share with you just a couple of paragraphs of what he sent to me just this week. Let's not just focus on our differences. let's consider how our similarity impacts our communication. I had an open mind and listened to you in our original meeting. I didn't focus on your Trump views. I focused on what I can agree with. You shared a vision, a charge, and progress for your constituents. You did not hide for 2 years only to make some appearance before the election. You were out taking people all over this unbelievably large district from Hartford County to Ocean City. You spoke to veterans, gays, fishermen, men, women, and even Trump supporters. That ambition, that is character, and that is unity, and that's what we need to get things done. You weren't even my congressional representative and did more to assist me in my veterans dispute with the VA. When you said you would put me in touch with someone, you were true to your word. I didn't have any expectations that they would be able to assist because of the complexity of my case, but damn, it felt really good that you tried. So let's forget that in Washington, we would sit on opposite sides of the aisle due to our affiliations and differences. Let's erase the aisle by focusing on the similar ideals we share. If unity, Ubuntu, is important to each of us, we will build from those shared ideals and learn to compromise on our differences. I think it's important to share these words with you because I can share with you anecdotes of engagement with people on the campaign trail, but I want you to hear back from them as well so that it feels more like a two-way communication. And to make real how it is that with effort, we can have these kinds of friendships and engagements. Ralph and I are never going to vote for the same person, or rarely. Well, we both voted for me. But it matters that he and I can talk to each other in this kind of way that I want to inspire you to do with other people as well. This isn't something unique to Heather and Ralph, or Heather and Robert, as I'll tell you next. My other C, connection. Connection invites new possibilities. When we learn together, we grow together. I believe we're experiencing so much chaos because we've chosen to unearth the things that are separating us so that we can heal them. Making a meaningful connection whittles away the toxic nature of polarization that threatens all of us. It is still a fundamental truth that we're all connected to each other as one. That reminds me of another story. Robert lives in Hebron, in Wicomico County, where during the 2022 campaign, he reached out to me, mad as hell, over a mailer I had sent to him, criticizing my opponent for his votes on veterans issues. He called me a liar and said it was everyone's right to rebel and even burn down DC because government has no right telling us what we can and can't do. But over the course of our conversation, we found connection. We both come from military families. We both were raised on or near farms. He liked my approach about caring for people more than political parties. And then we wrapped up the dialogue on that first back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and I have the receipts because a good chunk of it was written. So I'm going to share with you this way that we wrap this up. He says, I like down-to-earth people. You can put up with an old vet like this. You've got what it takes. And please forgive me for making an ass out of myself. And I said, well, I appreciate your apology. It's all good. I don't do guilt and shame. I understand that politics has become more about fighting each other than serving each other, but that's what I'm trying to change. And he said, you're so kind. It would be a shame to let our state and country go downhill by all the arguing. Yeah, I get caught up in it sometimes and I need to stop. Can't let all the sacrifices of those gone before be in vain. Military doesn't work by argument, but working together. It's what we need again. Now here's a guy who went from burn DC down to I need to stop with all the political arguing and work together again in the course of one conversation. Not only did he take a Republicans for Mizeur sign, but he shared with me that he told his therapist at the VA that meeting me and the conversations that we started having with each other was the most healing thing he had experienced since he had come back from the Iraq War. And our friendship has endured. Recently, Robert had to put down his dog companion of 15 years, Kaori. And I checked in on him to see how he was doing. We text each other sometimes every day, at least every week. And this is what he wrote to me just yesterday. Your friendship has meant the world to me. We may not see eye to eye on the political spectrum, but that isn't important. What is important is that we are humans struggling to make it through. Between you and my precious dog and wife, I've been taught to love through the hatred. If we can't be here for each other, then why are we here? A dog's love is unconditional. Ours should be too. We had a really nice conversation about how dogs make us all better humans and what unconditional love means in the world. We can't give without receiving something so much more in return than we could ever expect. Life is about love, and just because you may not agree with someone doesn't mean you can't be friends. After all, opposites attract because it means we're all missing something in our own lives, and I think God put us each together to meet our needs and theirs. I'm so grateful for your friendship. Hatred kills joy and a desire for goodness, but love can build a bridge. He says in the words of the Judds. He loves to quote musical songs. Trust is key. Building trust takes time, but it's the gold that alchemizes relationships. Your word is your bond. Let integrity be the most important quality you seek to cultivate. Trust flows from this. Seek to build trust with those who see the world differently than you do. It will teach you more than building friendships with those who complement your views. When I was in the state legislature, I had the honor to serve 8 years as a member of the Maryland General Assembly. And one of my best friends in the Maryland General Assembly was, I represented Tacoma Park and Silver Spring in Montgomery County where I lived at the time. And Mike Schmiegel was a deeply conservative Republican from Cecil County out here on the shore. He was the head of the pro-life caucus and a proud Tea Party guy. Pretty bombastic, the kind of guy that Heather Mizeur and Mike Schmiegel should have never become good friends. But we really started to notice and respect things about each other, started developing a friendship. And over time, Mike would even share personal secrets with me, things that I'd never have spoken about publicly before they became more public. At the time, we were working on marriage equality. He was a staunch opponent to marriage equality. But in private, he was having conversations with me about his daughter, talking to him about her own orientation, and him asking advice on how to be a good dad to her. He trusted and knew that I could hold that paradox. That I could give him the grace of having whatever his political view was, whatever he felt like he needed to do to represent his constituents, and also be a good human to his child. And that I could be his lesbian friend that gave him advice on how to do that for his daughter. And through that trust that we built on that and many other issues, I was able to go to him one day and say, Mike, I've got an idea on a bill I want us to work together on. We're going to lower the abortion rate in Maryland. We're going to improve infant mortality, and we're going to save the state money. And he looked at me and he said, all right, Mizeur, what's the catch? How is it that we're going to agree on all these things? And I said, well, when I tell you what it is, your instinct is going to say, I'm not for that. Because what it is an expansion of family planning services to low-income women in our state. But it's politics that has put the dividing line on that issue in making people think that this is about what your position is on reproductive health issues, on being pro-choice or pro-life, and that is not the battle line here. When we empower women to have babies when it makes sense to them by giving them access to free family planning services, then they get in the healthcare system sooner. They're having babies when they want to have babies. They're engaging with the system in a way that helps lower the infant mortality rate because they're getting prenatal care. The federal government wants to give us more money as a matching rate to do this, so it won't even cost us anything. And I'd done my homework and gone to the Alan Guttmacher Institute and found that the statistics that I knew would matter to him on the number of abortions that would be lowered in the state as a result of the lowered unwanted pregnancies. And he said, you know, you came to me with the right information, but I didn't even take a second to discount it just because you're a Democrat, because I trust you, because we've built this relationship. And as a result, we got that law passed. Maryland has been tackling the infant mortality rates in our state better than many other states as a result of that collaboration. We even wrote a joint opinion editorial in the Washington Post encouraging Congress, which was having a debate over closing down the federal government over a fight on whether to fund family planning services. And we were shining a bright light saying, if this uber conservative and progressive in Maryland can come together for the good of what makes the right policy choice for Maryland, you can do the same, Congress. And that enduring relationship and friendship that I have with Mike Schmiegel, bless his soul, he has passed a couple years ago, was one of the most important things to me in the legislature, and that was built on trust, our T word, and respectful. Which brings us to F, freedom. Freedom's why we do this difficult work of democracy. Freedom is the greatest gift ever bestowed on us, but it's not free. We must be serious about our collective role as the guardians of our own experiment in freedom. Some might believe that the only way we safeguard our freedom is by winning an election. I do not dispute that many individual civil liberties and freedoms often hang in the balance of who controls power. And for that reason, elections and the distinctions they make about issues absolutely matter. This is a great opportunity for me to clarify here that all of my encouragement of how we can get along better to preserve democracy is not intended to dampen the spirit of energetic contests within democracy and the need to work hard for your own personal views to prevail at the ballot box. But there's a necessary and parallel process that has been failing us, because we've only just been focusing on that. I want my person with my views and my approach to win, and I'm just going to shout down no matter what your opinions are. And this parallel process that's been failing us is that we work for the outcome we desire while simultaneously cultivating the human connection necessary to preserve our national security. Russia, North Korea, China, and other foreign adversaries not only cheer on our internal foment, they stoke it through their sophisticated misinformation campaigns that are specifically designed to tear us apart. Ralph, Robert, Brenda, and Joanne, who I'll tell you about in a minute, we can all disagree with me about whom they choose to vote for in this presidential election. But nothing is going to keep me from heading to Georgia next week to do GOTV and voter election protection in Atlanta for my candidate of choice. But we're going to still be friends. We both can work really hard for what we believe in and still know how to talk to each other in a civil way. We have to resist the urge to separate ourselves into categories of us and them, which is meant to chip away at the foundation of democracy. Remember that when I respect your freedom, mine is strengthened. Let's rededicate ourselves to championing freedom by disrupting the division. You, unhook. We can all benefit from unhooking a bit more often from our phones, our TVs, our social media profiles, doom scrolling. When we unhook from outside influences, we create opportunities for deeper internal growth. Inquire, examine, and be curious about yourself in these moments where we're separating ourselves from the distraction. Removing external distractions forces our gaze inward. Most of us do not know the fullness of who we truly are. We don't often look inside. Periods of isolation and reflection, or just unhooking from these social media devices, helps us become more familiar with our patterns of thinking, with our triggers, including how we respond to provocation and what matters most to us, if we're paying attention. This is a chance to notice what you're noticing, to become an expert on you. L is for listen. Good listening is more than paying attention to a pause in a conversation so you can insert your talking point. Many people listen that way. I'm listening, all right. I'm listening I'm tracking what you're saying so I can argue against all the points I think are wrong. And as soon as you take a breath or pause, I'm going to insert all the things that I know to be true and right. That's how a lot of people think we listen.
It's not listening.
That is not listening. The way we listen is by becoming illuminators. We ask questions. Our existence is animated by our encounters with otherness. It's that curiosity I was talking about before. A 2012 Harvard study found that people took more pleasure from sharing information about themselves than receiving money. You heard that right. People take more pleasure in sharing information about themselves than in receiving money. But how often are you ever asked a question in dialogue that invites that kind of sharing? What are some illuminator questions? What are the high points, the low points, and the turning points in your life? What crossroads are you at? What are your sacred dreams? What is the great hunger of your spirit? What would you do if you weren't afraid? If you died tonight, what would you regret not doing? If the next 5 years is a chapter in your life, what is that chapter about? Tell me about a time you adapted to change. What has become clearer to you as you age? I could go on and on. There's so many interesting questions that we can use as a way to truly engage with someone and listen to what it is that they have to say. And that reminds me of a story. I met Brenda in a farm feed parking lot right here in Chestertown. We were both loading our vehicles with chicken food and other supplies, and she stopped me, super excited, and said, "You're Heather Mizeur, right?" And I shook her hand and said, "I sure am, and I hope I've earned your vote in this election." She was so lit up, I was just certain she was a supporter. And she says, "Oh no, I don't support you. I don't think so. I'm a Trump voter." And I told her, well, that didn't dissuade me. If she got to know me, she might see that we have more in common than she thinks. So we talked about guns and vaccines. And we didn't have the same views on both issues, but I listened to her with genuine respect and compassion. I asked her a lot of questions. I was really, really curious. And I listened to her. I deeply listened to her. So much so that she started to get emotional and cry. And she said, "I don't know why I'm so emotional." She said, "I think it's because I don't feel like anyone has ever listened to me so deeply before." And she said, "Especially not a Democrat." She said, "You don't make me feel like I'm crazy." And then she asked me if I'd give her a hug. And, you know, I had a very similar situation just a few weeks ago, our nonprofit was hosting a group of women veterans on the farm and doing programming. And through my curiosity, compassion, and listening, one of the women at this retreat twice pulled me aside and asked me to hold her. And she leans in and whispers to me as I'm hugging her, "I feel like you're the only one who understands me." And I didn't find out until a few days after the retreat that this African American woman was a Maryland Trump delegate to the Republican National Convention. There's a lot of levels under which one would presume that we wouldn't understand each other. And yet, she felt that connection and that comfort and that openness to wanting an embrace and wanting to connect in a tough moment. Listening, just listening, is powerful, powerful medicine. So respectful, reciprocity, engagement, checking sources, pausing before we have that response, equanimity for that calm temper, engaging curiosity, courage, compassion, and connection, trust, freedom, unhooking from outside influences, and deep listening. All of this fosters the generative feeling of respect that creates regard for the feelings, wishes, and traditions of others. There's so much beauty that flows from respect. We can do better. We can be better. Identification by a political party and ideology alone becomes a default marker for dividing us into teams of rivals. Aren't we all just neighbors first? Where we come from, when a truck is broken down on the side of the road, does anybody stop and say, "Let me see what kind of bumper sticker they got there before I decide whether or not I'm going to help them"? Of course not. They're our neighbor. We're going to help them. Showing civility towards people we disagree with isn't just about being nice or polite. It isn't only about having better and more productive conversations. It's about the very survival of our cherished democracy. And democracy isn't some abstract concept that government is responsible for keeping. Democracy is our charge. It is about us, our collective dreams, desires, and vision for self-governance. Democracy is freedom in action. It's the bringing together of all sides to find the best solutions to the biggest challenges we face. And if politics is allowed to devolve primarily into a power struggle over which party controls the dialogue and the agenda, then we all lose. In an age when social media, cable TV, and talk radio encourage and reward those who regard the other side stupid or evil, common decency becomes radical. Kindness towards those you disagree with is revolutionary. And creating a political environment where all opinions are listened to with respect becomes the insurrection we need. Together, let us disrupt the division, and may we build a Maryland where we all proudly can say we are one. And I'm deeply thankful that you were here tonight, and I look forward to the question and answer portion of this evening.
For the following question and answer portion, you'll raise your hand, and then Heather will call on you, and then we'll have an intimate setting where she can answer those questions personally. So feel free to raise your hand and ask questions.
And no question is off limits. Heather, in the hot seat. I'm going to start with Mia in the back, and then I'll come up to you, sir.
What inspired you to take this career path?
Mia asked, for those who are watching at home, what inspired me to take this career path. My mother would say coming out of the womb. I pretty much have always had this desire for civic engagement. When I was really young, I thought that it was more a calling towards religious service. I am a Catholic woman who believes very deeply in the social justice teachings of feeding the hungry and housing the homeless and healing the sick. And I really loved the idea of preaching and giving homilies, and then I found out that my ovaries were going to get in the way of that. And noticed that another state representative in my community who was a woman was galvanizing the community. My father was a United Auto Worker, and she'd go to the picket lines and work with the auto workers to try to resolve their contract disputes, and was in the parades and shaking hands and talking to people about their problems. And I was like, okay, this is actually another way of doing that public service, civic engagement, connecting your heart with a desire to serve can be achieved not just in spiritual settings, but in community engagement through politics. Now, what's always been interesting to me, Mia, is that it can be and often is such a toxic arena. So for someone who wants to practice this different kind of approach, it's not how it naturally is in politics, at least in our modern era. But I love a good challenge. And I really enjoy seeing what needs to be done and speaking to it and encouraging cultural shifts to create those opportunities. And for the same reason that I still identify as a Catholic woman who's been unwilling to leave the church even with some of its failings, I enjoy working for change within institutions. And so I also really valued my time as a legislator. But the role I'm serving in my nonprofit organization is really to take all that I've learned and bring it out onto a bigger platform where I spend more time helping to teach and grow these kinds of engagements in ways that take out some of the part that I don't like about being in elected office is if I were running for office right now or had any intention to in the future, which I don't, there'd be people in audiences that would second guess because of the toxic nature of politics. Oh, is she just saying this to try to get my vote? Is she just doing this to work us? Is this genuine or authentic? If you have time to get to know me, you know who I am. You know my authenticity. You know what my integrity is. But modern politics don't often allow for that kind of connection. So the work I'm doing now at the WeAreOne Alliance and various programs that we're offering, and I hope that you'll be part of, helps to take all these same things that I care deeply about and the change I'd like to see happen and implement that through the nonprofit civic engagement. Yes, sir.
Sure. So first of all, I think this is a wonderful concept that you're talking about here today. And I believe very strongly in the concept of the shadow of leadership. And you mentioned a lot of factors such as social media, other elements, but the biggest factor in my view is the fact that the majority of our elected officials is the source of a lot of this contention and divisiveness, almost to the point that it's made government marginally dysfunctional. And I would submit that you're probably an enigma, and I mean that as a compliment. How do we get the leaders to start acting this way? Because I think that's the biggest factor that's trickling down and pervading through society to create this toxic divisiveness.
Yeah, you're so right. What's your name, sir?
I'm Irv Bruxton. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at the college.
Great, nice to meet you, Irv. Thank you so much for the question. For those at home, Irv asked the role of so much of the toxic nature in politics tends to be tends to come from the elected leaders themselves. And my thought on that, Irv, is that our elected officials are a reflection of us. We want better candidates. We have to engage in a deeper way. we have to realize that democracy is a participatory sport. And when we're not engaged, and we don't consider running for office ourselves, or we don't think it's important that we write the letters or knock on the doors or part with some portion of our time, treasure, and talent to make it happen, then we're left with what we get sometimes. There are also a lot of things working against us in the current system, gerrymandering being one of the biggest challenges. The fact that our country, there's hardly any district left in the entire Congress that isn't entirely one way or another. So elected representatives don't feel the need, they're not held accountable at the ballot box to consider a range of opinions. They play to their base. And here in our district, in the 2022 cycle, the lines were being redrawn. We had a shot here at having a really fair election where the district lines were 50-50. They were changed from being the 60% weighted gerrymandered district to a 50-50 district that would have, I mean, all our districts should endeavor to be more 50-50. But the courts threw it out. And so it went back to the 60% district. And though in that particular example, I'm really proud that all that activity and the Heather in the hot seat and all that reaching across the aisle, again, it was about creating a cultural shift. It wasn't about just trying to win an election. But to the proof of how it worked, our campaign outperformed Joe Biden by 3 points, which said another way is that 3% of Trump's voters in 2020 voted for Mizeur in 2022. And in our current polarized environment, that kind of shift, I was never going to be able to get 10%. Once the district lines went away, it was almost guaranteed I was not going to win. And there are some people who said to me immediately when that happened, well, you're going to just drop out, right? And I said, no, I've never been in this race just to win it. I'm in this race to change how we interact with each other. And in so doing, I'm hopeful that it changes other people as well. Chris Van Hollen's chief of staff told me recently that there are a lot of ways that the congressman from this district is showing up differently than he used to. And every time he says something that is a bit more normal, less outrageous, a bit more willing to collaborate on a handful of things, Chris leans over to her and he says, Heather did that. But you did it. You did it by being involved in the campaign, by exercising your voice, by, in this county, we won by 12 points in this county. Talk about a giant crossover appeal. When people get a chance to know who you are, this is my home base, people know me here. So they can trust me regardless of where the political line is. That's harder to do in the current political environment without a lot of money too. We have a decent amount of that, but the financial system behind the election process is also challenging. So you're right, it's a bit of a mess. And I think that the way that eventually, ultimately gets fixed is by us doing a better job of fixing ourselves at the local community level. Everything always ripples out. Even the best ideas in legislation. When I was a state legislator, we would pass a law in Maryland to show how it could get done at the federal level. We do it in Maryland first, then all of a sudden, hey, that's a really good idea, let's pick it up. One of the first laws I passed was to allow young adults to remain on their family health plans until they were 25 years old. It was originally an idea I worked on. You can clap for that, because when I worked for John Kerry, I was his domestic policy director, and one of the things that we worked on in his presidential campaign, that was one of the proposals that we had. Because you shouldn't have to lose your health insurance because you graduate from high school. And we couldn't get it passed at the federal level. So we went and did it in Maryland, and several other states did it, and then all of a sudden, President Obama is wrapping it into the Affordable Care Act, and it got done across the country. So you do things in a small way, in a meaningful way, at a local level, in your own community, in your own family. Sometimes repairing the damage that's done right now starts within our own families, right? And then it works into our other concentric circles, our community within our college, our local groups that we're in, our community here in Chestertown, your county, then it goes out to the state, then it becomes a beacon for how things are done in other places. Call me naive, but I truly believe in the spirit of a change happens. It can like be a tidal wave. You just have to hit a certain threshold of consciousness where everyone's like, this is what we want and this is how it needs to be different, and then all of a sudden it all changes. Last thing I'll say about that is we see this with deer and other animals of prey. If you see a group of deer, there'll be a sound that catches one of them, and they'll pay attention, and then when somebody else understands that they need to pay attention, they'll start raising their head. Scientists who study this behavior say that at around 40, a little less than 40% of a herd kind of having a conscious connection to there being a concern is enough to make the entire herd in an instant realize they all have to run. And so there's something about being in that kind of alignment with each other. So we just always have to keep working on ourselves, and then the change within becomes the change that we can put out into the world, and it becomes something that can replicate, and I believe will. George, and then I'm going to come over here to the two students in this corner.
So, ironically, the redistricting decision that cost you the election was the result of one of the stupidest opinions I've ever read, written by a woman judge. So, but I appreciate the fact that you continue to soldier on. So my question, would you disagree with my perhaps overgeneralization that the toxicity that exists in the country's politics right now is largely the fault of the excessive representation of men and the insufficient representation of women, and that if that imbalance were to change, that we would be better off? Or is that too
I think it's too
simplistic?
I think it's too simplistic to divide it on a gender construct. I really believe that to reemphasize something that I had just said, no matter how much change I wanted to create through my legislative activities and my initiatives and my ideas and my willingness to rally people around it and let's go past this and let's do that, that's all important and necessary work, and I learned so much from it, and it is a beautiful way to engage outside of yourself to make a difference. And the way that I did that work at a certain phase of my life changed when I started to pay more attention on that unhooking side of things that I was talking to you about, and the equanimity side of things, and really working on my own internal awareness of how do I want to show up in the world, and then are my politics reflecting that? Is how I'm interfacing with people reflecting that? Because, I was at a certain phase of my life politically as combative as anyone else about those Republicans and, we've got to fight, and win, and fight. All the language is always fight, right? Like, no, we don't have to fight about everything all the time. We just have to show up, know what we believe in, honor someone else. Not to put you on the spot, but just a tiny example. That agreement, that judge's opinion, I believe was very unfortunate, maybe ill-advised, and I could have a conversation with some folks about things I disagreed about in it. I wouldn't call it stupid.
Well, I was reading it from a lawyer's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was flat out wrong and unfair.
Wrong. unfair?
Yeah.
See the difference in the energy behind those words though? If you were to talk to someone in a conversation, and let's say you were sitting down with someone and you were trying to have a dialogue about that opinion, there's a very different energy. If somebody is agreeing with that opinion and you're sitting there and you're disagreeing with the opinion, if you come out and say, that opinion was stupid.
Well, I wouldn't start out a conversation with that judge that way.
Well, not with the judge, of course, but I'm not talking about just with people who are in power. I'm just, in general, like, it's that catching ourselves, that moment of pause, that being really super aware of everything has energy behind it. All of our language has energy behind it. The words that we use, the way that our facial expressions, all of it matters. There's energy to all of those things. Yeah. And if you could introduce yourselves too.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My name's Zach, I'm a student. Have you ever written or considered writing a book specifically about what you shared with us tonight?
Zach. I have considered it quite a bit, and I have consistently not found the time to do it, and in part, it's because life tends to show up. So I thought when I first launched the nonprofit organization in 2017, which we then at the time called Soulforce PoliTalks, now Soulforce PoliTalks is a program within the WeAreOne Alliance. We renamed the organization after the campaign to kind of reflect this larger umbrella of priorities. And I was very seriously starting to sort of sketch out one version of a book in around 2018, 2019, and there was COVID, and then all of a sudden the next thing I knew I was running for Congress when I had never planned to run for Congress. That ate up 2 years of my life. Then there was 2023, which was, okay, I gotta get back on my farm, I gotta take care of all the things I neglected from my farm to my family and my organization, and a bunch of new programs that we're getting ready to roll out. And just recently, when I got back from Africa, I haven't released this yet, but I did some pretty extensive writing about my experience in Africa. That essay alone is clearly a chapter of a book. And as I prepared for this lecture tonight, I started saying, oh, well, there's another chapter of a book. And so, Zach, I think a book is coming. I need to be a bit more disciplined about sitting down to make that happen among all the other things I've been juggling. But it's something I'm very seriously considering as a priority for the next year. Tell me, would you read it if I did?
I was going to say, I'll keep an eye out for it.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you, Zach.
Hi, my name's Evelyn. I'm a student here at Washington College, and I'm also a staff writer for the student newspaper. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that a big part of the polarization that we see in our politics today is fear.
Yeah.
And I think that fear comes from misunderstanding, but once it reaches that level of fear, it's very easy to slip into anger and blame. And just speaking from personal experience, once it does go from fear to anger and blame and like placing scapegoats, it's very hard to walk that back. So how would you address going about like addressing the baseline misunderstanding when it has reached like fear and anger and blame?
Thank you so much, Evelyn. So for those watching at home, Evelyn asked about the ways in which fear is the root of what causes an escalation of fear and blame and other toxic responses, and how do you pull that back? A lot of it is cultivating new skills in ways of being, which and in all of these skills, I encourage you to be gentle on yourself. You're not going to do it right all the time, and it takes a while to develop as a regular practice of being. I've been practicing for a long time, and I'm still not perfect at it by any stretch. But I do spend a lot of time paying attention to what I am noticing and paying attention to about myself first. So often, somebody else's fear is only going to connect to you if you have that same wound that you're kind of unaware of. Or you might be subtly aware of it, but when you're presented with that other person's fear, it ignites your own fear. And if you're not used to being aware of, oh, I know I have this fear. So when you're unaware of it, what happens is the fear gets poked, and then you immediately are in response mode because your fear is poking you, and you're responding because you're acting in a way that is not aware of this underlying issue. Whereas if you've done a lot of work on sitting with yourself in isolation, and by isolation, I'm not expecting you to be super radically crazy about it the way I do. I kind of am a bit more extreme. We have like a yurt in our woods where, you know, I might spend 3 or 4 days by myself fasting and just spending time in nature just to think and just to pay attention to myself and just to look. Because when we're watching TV, engaging with friends, online, on social media, just doing life, we're really outside of ourselves. And it's really easy to not pay attention to all the things that are going on about who we are and how we show up and what are our fears, what are our anxieties, what's really driving us. When you take all that away and just unhook a little bit, you don't have to go into the woods like Thoreau so that upon dying I wouldn't discover that I had not lived. But you can get really familiar with yourself so that when you know, oh, I have a fear of, let me just pick a random thing. I have a fear that I have scarcity fears, that there's not enough in the world, that I'm not going to be able to pay my rent, okay? And it's sort of from a line of family scarcity and poverty. Like, this is a real legit issue that you're carrying around this fear. If you're kind of unaware of it, and somebody says or does something that stokes that fear, then you're going to have the response. But when you're working on yourself and you can say, okay, I'm very aware that I have some triggers around scarcity, so that when it does get triggered, then it becomes a teaching moment from the trigger. So the emotion itself is a teacher. When your anxiety comes forward, it's letting you know, oh, there's a situation here. And so you pay attention to it. And with that awareness, then that's where the pause matters. That's where taking that moment to decide how you're going to respond really creates a different engagement with it. Does that help? Yeah. It's and I go back often to the piece of this is first about them, and then if I'm having a reaction to it, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm noticing my reaction. I'm noticing that I'm having a response. I'm going to spend some time later unpacking what was that about. But while I'm still trying to figure that out, I know that by paying attention to, oh, I had a response, I take that pause, make a choice on not to respond in that kind of angry way, and then later sit with, what was I being asked to learn in that moment? What was my fear trying to teach me then? Because your fear is also an ally. Fear keeps us safe. Fear keeps us from jumping off of cliffs, and fear keeps us from, doing all kinds of things that could get us into trouble. Fear is a primate, a prehistoric kind of hardwired helper for us. It's not a bad thing. Fear isn't to be beaten out of us. We can befriend our demons, though, so that they become our teachers instead of our rulers.
Heather, do one last question.
Okay, Max?
You talked a little bit about kind of how it starts with a few people and then it kind of works its way up. I don't have a ton of resources or a ton of knowledge in the whole political sphere. What's something that someone like me can do to get involved?
So Max wants to know how to get involved as someone who doesn't have a lot of resources. And do you have time? Oh, well, time is money in politics. You can decide, are there causes that you care deeply about? You can decide to get involved with organizations that work within the political realm of issue advocacy, because maybe you might be somebody who is more driven to work on environmental issues or housing issues or fiscal policy, like whatever your niche is, whatever you're studying, whatever your interest. You might decide that I don't have a lot of politicians that I trust or that I'm excited about helping them get elected, but I care about these issues. So you can get involved with organizations that do issue advocacy. That's one way you can spend your time. You can spend your time, I mean, thank you for coming out tonight. I mean, how many, 19 days before an election, we've got a packed auditorium here of mostly college students, which I'm so pleasantly surprised with both the measure of people from the community and the college coming here to have this dialogue with PoliTalks. The organization that Zach and Stephen have put together is really effective, very well run. I know that they're going to be connecting people to different opportunities depending on what your interests are. So staying engaged with PoliTalks is an option. If there are local elected officials that inspire you, that you want to get involved with, you can kind of learn the ropes that way. Even if they don't inspire you, but you think you want to run for office someday, volunteer and work with them to learn the ropes and run against them when you're ready to put your name on the ballot. And it doesn't always have to be political engagement. Let me end, Max, with this. Every campaign I've ever run, and even my nonprofit organization will be launching one of these soon, we've always had a volunteer service corps. I always believed that you didn't have to wait to win an election to make a difference. And I'm a former AmeriCorps member, and so community service is really, really critical, I believe. And I also think that when people come together to work on community service projects, that's where we're knitting that connection back to each other. When you're at the food pantry, cooking food and serving up your neighbors and having conversations, no one's focusing on what party are you, or who are you voting for, or any of that. It's that neighbor-to-neighbor connection again. And community service is the most beautiful foundational piece of civic engagement. I believe that all elected officials should do more to engage their supporters and the electorate in doing community service and not just, hey, help me get elected. And so we're going to be adding a volunteer service corps eventually to one of the new programs we're going to roll out next year. And you can volunteer with us, you can volunteer with, there's so many great organizations in Chestertown. I'm sure that Arlie Johnson here would love to talk to you about any number of the organizations she's involved in the community. But just getting involved, because that's how you'll learn where you want to put your time and talent and treasure as you continue to grow that engagement. There's another hand popping up. Do we have time for one more, or?
Well, we're actually going to wrap up in here.
Okay.
We're going to transition to 30 minutes outside, kind of informal with the cookies and coffee and stuff. So if people have more questions, they can come up to you and ask them.
Okay.
That's all
All
right.
right, great.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. Thank you so much.
We really, really appreciate you all being here. Please have cookies and coffee and feel free to ask Heather some more questions.
Thank you all.